and welcome to Health Assured's Peace of Mind podcast. My name is Sofia Feghali and I'm one of the lead counsellors here at Health Assured. Our topic for this month is about disability and inclusion in the workplace. It's estimated that 1.4 billion people in the world are living with a disability, and I think this is a really important topic to talk about. And I know that it affects so many different people, and I don't think it's one that's spoken enough about. So to talk and dive a little bit further into this topic with me today, I'm excited to be sat here with Brittany Chambers. Brittany is one of our wellbeing counsellors, and she's going to be sharing more of her thoughts, ideas about this topic. So, hi Brittany.
Hi.
Hey, thanks so much for coming down today and, talking about this incredibly important topic. Always before we get started, I want to first hear a bit more about you. So, we know that you're one of our counsellors here. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about your background?
So I joined the grad programme. So that's a 6-month programme on going basically through everything that the EAP does. And I joined the grad programme because I thought it was a really good introduction into the EAP programme in itself. And I feel the topic with disability, especially with hidden disabilities, it's not very much spoken about. And I feel that it's important to bring awareness around it, look at how workplace and organisation can improve their space for people with hidden or, physical disabilities.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think, when I first heard the start of, 1.3 billion people in the world actually carrying a disability with them, I was really surprised to hear that number. I thought it was a lot bigger than what I initially thought it would have been. And when you actually break that number down, that's 1 in 6 people that actually have a disability. I think it's 1 in 5 in the UK. And, if we actually look at the definition of disability by the Equality Act, so the Equality Act says that to have a disability, you need to be in a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial, adverse or long-term effect on your ability to carry out normal or day-to-day activities. And I think when we look at that definition of it, it's like you were saying there, it's not always physical. It's not always something that you can see on someone. It can a lot of the times be hidden. They might even be hiding aspects of it, or ones that they might not be carrying on with them, might be invisible. And I think that's a lot of the reasons as to why I was so surprised to hear how big that number was, is because a lot of people don't really carry that around with them.
Yeah, I think I was surprised to hear that number as well, in terms of, I think that just shows that we basically at least know someone with a visible or invisible disability. But as you said there, I think some people just mask it a lot better, especially with invisible, and don't share that, or possibly they don't know themselves if they're neurodivergent, and they haven't gone on that pathway to access that diagnosis or know anything about it. So I think it is quite shocking of how high it is, but it just shows that we at least know somebody with a disability.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that as well and used the term masking. I think a lot of people that are disabled or even neurodivergent, or a group of people that face any sort of discrimination, they're made to feel different and they're in a society where inclusion isn't there, a lot of masking happens. And I think it's really unfortunate it happens, and I think it's such an important point to especially bring about in terms of invisible disability, because it's like, you might sort of look at someone and say that person doesn't look disabled, and then automatically, in even just saying that in itself, it means that you're not able to look at the sort of accessibility that they might need in that sort of instance. So, I think it's important to be open-minded about it and to know that there's lots of different types.
Yeah, because I think especially neurodivergency, it goes into many different types, doesn't it? I think people just see it as ADHD and autism, but it goes into dyslexia, dyspraxia, Tourette syndrome, and I think it's sad that people will say, you don't look disabled. I think there's that stereotype of what people think disabled looks like and what their accessibility needs look like, and how the support them looks like. Whereas somebody with maybe ADHD or Tourette syndrome, they need different forms of support and different accessibility to somebody who would have maybe a physical disability where they need perhaps, you know, like an elevator, for example, because people will see that as like a stereotype, and perhaps that's a stereotype coming out there in terms of this is what this person may need, but we don't know that unless we speak to somebody. And I feel like with neurodivergency, because obviously it's not something that is maybe spoken about, and people do mask, it can be quite hard for employers to think, okay, what does their support look like if it's not a physical need? What does it look like for them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when people think about it, they might automatically think of it being physical, something that you can see, but it's also in the way that, you know, your mind works, the way that you process information socially, how you communicate with other people. So it's important, I'm glad we've said that, you have to have an open mind, that it's not just physical, it can be in any type of way. And I think it's important as well to note about, I mean, you know, I don't want to sit here and name like loads of different types of disabilities, because I always think it's important to look at how it affects an individual rather than what it actually is, because it can be such a massive wide spectrum. But when you look at, okay, I've talked to this person and I know that they struggle with these things in particular because of this, what sort of things can I do to make it easier for them or make things more accessible? So I think it's important to also approach it in a way of like looking at how it affects them rather than what it is.
Yeah. And I think that's what, you know, it's a really important point that you mentioned there, that it is important to look at how it affects them, because they are living with this on a daily basis. You know, they're trying to function as best as they can if it impacts their mental health and things like that as well. You know, so instead of focusing just on what their diagnosis is, it's more important to look at, okay, how can we support this individual going forward to, you know, maybe it's to improve their mental well-being, maybe it's to make them feel a bit more included and make the environment more inclusive as well. And just ultimately supported all round really in those type of environments in the workplace and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's just having that open conversation, having that empathy and listening to them and saying, okay, what can I do to create a culture of respect for this person? And I think when it comes down to it, there's also a lot of discrimination that comes around with this, you know, really unfortunately. I don't know if a lot of people are aware of the term ableism, which I just wanted to talk a little bit more about today. So ableism is a type of discrimination, either inadvertently or consciously, where someone will discriminate against someone due to their disability. And, you know, I think if we're linking this back to the workplace, because I think it's important to talk about disability and the link that it has with, you know, this massive employment gap that we have. I think it's something like 76% of non-disabled people are more likely to be employed compared to disabled people, which is, I mean, it's such a shockingly high number, that. And I think a big part of that is due to ableism, a discrimination. And I think sometimes people, you know, if you hear that you're discriminating against someone, some people might feel like a very strong reaction to it. They might be like, what? No, like, I don't mean it. And it's like, you know, you might not mean to be discriminating against them for that way, but I think it's something that can be done very unconsciously as well. It's something they might not be aware of. And I mean, ways that people might do it is sort of, you know, they might look at disabled people and think they might not be productive for this role. They might not be able enough to do this role. You know, what are your thoughts a little bit more about that, and how, I don't know, I suppose a boss going to hire a disabled person, what views they might already have?
Yeah, I think you're right there in saying, you know, I think it's that unconscious bias that we form, possibly like an assumption of what people can they do, what can't they do. Yeah. And we limit that person before actually getting to know them, looking at what support they actually need. And we make that unconscious judgment. You know, of course, people can make conscious judgment, but I feel like, you know, there is that generalised unconscious judgment where, again, it's going back to that ableism, isn't it? You know, going back to that, in a way, negative perception of somebody and what their limitations are. You know, opposed to speaking to them, I think opening up that conversation and saying, you know, is there anything that we should be aware of in terms of accessibility and special needs? It opens that conversation up where that person can then have the opportunity to respond in terms of what they struggle with, and then coming back to that and saying, you know, how can we support you in the workplace, for example, and becoming more open-minded, because support looks very different for different people. It's very individualistic. So by asking that question of how can we support you, it opens that dialogue up, which I think is really useful, especially when it comes to employing somebody. It can take away that unconscious bias by opening up the dialogue and that conversation.
Yeah, it's being open, and it's wanting to just listen to people and their experience rather than just going in with, like you were saying, different biases that we might have, which are just like kind of conscious patterns of thoughts that we have. And a lot of the times they are very deep rooted. So it takes a lot to just be self-aware about it. But like you said, I think just being open and having those conversations with people and encouraging them, you know, to be open. I think it's definitely like not easy to do for everyone in the workplace. Not saying that it's the right thing to do, but I think just being aware about those biases is important.
Yeah.
And as well, like just having that culture of just openness with everyone. And I think even things like feedback channels, like anonymous ones, can be helpful. Evaluating, you know, what things you'd put in place, how it's working. Just really listening to people can really help.
Yeah, and I think having, you know, training on diversity and disability, I think would be really important as well, because then that increases, you know, people's knowledge. And you know, because coming into this podcast, people may not have known that 1 in 5 people that you know could have a disability. You know, so I think by having the training, by having the education on disability and how it impacts people, and just ultimately, you know, addressing our own prejudices, our biases that we may have, and being, you know, aware of that and being honest about them. And in the training, you know, possibly they're looking at becoming more self-aware. As you said there, it's not something that we can do like a bit of an on-off switch. It's very hard to become self-aware when something's so deep-rooted. But I think by opening that conversation up, having the training, and sharing that education with people, it increases that self-awareness. And hopefully this podcast will do that for people as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think even if you've clicked on this from whatever sort of background you are, it shows that you are willing to be open about it and to learn more about it. And I like what you said then about it not being an on and off switch for change. And I think sometimes it can be really good to even just be like congruent and open with your employees. So, you know, if you are like a manager or a boss or even like a friend, a family member that's supporting someone who's disabled, just being honest with them, just saying, you know, like, I'm doing my best right now, but I'm still trying to understand more and support. You know, I'm new to this.
Yeah.
You know, what can I do? You know, that can help a bit more. I think that can be incredibly important as well.
Yeah, and I think with that honesty, as you said there, you know, you mentioned empathy. I think that's a really important factor as well, in terms of, you know, saying to somebody, you know, I hear you and kind of I want to be there for you. How can I do that? So, you know, and with empathy, you know, say, you know, it feels really tough to go through that and to have those struggles, you know, and I think looking not as solutions as such, but more so looking at, again, that support in terms of how can we go forward with this, you know, what would a more inclusive framework look like for you? So maybe it's, you know, not coming back to my disability, you know, or maybe it's, you know, as I said, it's different for different people, isn't it? It's very individualistic in terms of what their needs are. And I think it just goes back to opening that conversation up and not being an ableist in a way, you know, not having that negative connotation, trying to encourage the positives, because it's not a negative thing to be disabled.
Yeah.
It can be a very positive thing. And I think people, because they reinforce that negative narrative, you know, around disabled people, I think by changing that narrative and saying, you know, actually, what are your strengths? What are you good at? I think that goes in with your empathy, but looking at, you know, having that conversation in terms of, let's look at this in a positive way. and I think that can be helpful for people as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point that you've made, though, and actually seeing the strengths that they hold rather than just, the struggles that they go through as well. Because, when we think about it, 1.3 billion people in the world are living with a disability. And when you think about the certain biases that employers might have for not wanting to hire disabled people, creating a massive cut in talent that they might bring as well. And, it's always good to look at it from like a positive angle of like, what strengths does your disability bring? And I think sometimes they forget that we make up the population. Yeah. That's why inclusivity is so important. And I think, even as like a business or a company as well, it can bring in a lot of new set of skills that people might have. So like sign language interpreters, like, as just one of many examples. And it can be like a whole different set of skills. And that can also, by having more diverse range of employees, it also brings in a new set of customers, people using the business as well. I think we've seen that at Health Assured as well. Like, we work quite closely with Deaf for Deaf.
Yeah.
And we're also able to match, we have a live chat service, for people that are hard of hearing. And even if they're having any sort of social anxiety about reaching out for support, we can still access support through a written format and match for counsellors that can do that sign language. And, if we weren't open in that respect to disability, or that gap in the market, then, there's so many people that won't be able to use that function for support just as anyone else would.
Yeah, because it becomes so limiting, I guess, if those accessibility formats weren't there around like live chat, video chat, Deaf for Deaf, also language line as well, I guess, in a way. It opens that form of accessibility for people, whereas other places might not give those people those formats that they need. And it's quite a shame really that can happen, that it can be so closed off to people. So it's nice that Health Assured does open that pool up of accessibility for people in different formats in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think it's just about listening to what people need and saying, okay, what do you need? What can we do to accommodate for that? Because like you were saying before, everyone has different experiences with it. It's very individualistic to everyone. I think it's important to note that, not everyone is really born with a disability. They might have it from, a chronic illness, cancer. They might have been injured in an accident. So that means that they sort of need that support after. And I know a lot of people that sort of like go into that field where they've been through some sort of, incident that's left them disabled. They're also quite strong advocates for it because they really know it could literally happen to anyone, couldn't it? And they can really feel it inside of them, how it's changed for them. How, you look at certain things, even though I think that there has been an improvement in sort of accessibility needs and discrimination, I think there is still like a long way to go with it. And, from, being able to function, not need any of that assistance, and then to have something happen to you and then to sort of look at the world around you, you look at it completely differently.
Yeah, I think that's where the empathy comes, isn't it? It's it's looking at what can we do to support you now, and understanding that when, as you mentioned there, like for example, if somebody had cancer or an accident, that it changes their life essentially. Some people can't do the activities that they used to like to do, and coping mechanisms and things like that. So it's looking at I think, as you mentioned there, going back to that support, opening that empathy but recognising that it isn't something that you are just born with, and it can happen in different points of people's lives. It's not just a one size fits all in a way, if you will.
Yeah.
It's very individualistic, which I think is what we keep coming back to in terms of, it's per the individual, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. And that's why I think we've mentioned a lot about empathy there, because I think the compassion is so important for everyone. And, I know that there's also a term as well that I also learned about when I was like sort of looking into this, called internalized ableism, which is a type of ableism that disabled people feel against themselves. So, being in an ableist society, they might sort of absorb negative viewpoints that people might have against disabled people, and they feel it themselves, which is really, really sad, I thought, like, to hear, because I was like, oh, that's a discrimination that you're going again. You know, that's a discrimination that's against you, but you actually absorb it and you feel it yourself.
Yeah, it becomes like they're almost believing that. And I think that's where it, you know, as I mentioned earlier, it comes into a part of saying, you know, I hear that you feel this is negative. Why is that? But looking at the positive things that they can do, you know, looking at the positive attributions they already have, you know, because some strengths that they have, another person may not have.
Yeah.
But I think that, you know, as you said there, that internalized ableism, it comes from that, you know, that belief in terms of, well, this is what's wrong with me. This is what other people are saying, so it must be true. But no one notifies the good things that they have. It's very much that negative connotation.
Yeah, exactly. So focusing on the positives of what they go through. And I think with anyone that's going through any sort of, you know, disability or any even neurodivergence, or they're from any sort of minority background, I'm sure they've always felt, if you've ever felt different, that can sometimes make you feel really secluded from everyone else. It makes you feel like there's something wrong with me because I'm different to everyone else. And it makes sense in a way, because we're like social beings. You know, we want to be with the tribe. We want to not conform as much, like not having a sense of autonomy, but we want to fit in with everyone.
Included.
Yeah, so it's understandable why we have that. But then when we're in a society that tells us that, you know, difference is bad, then it starts to lead to that, you know, I think the offsets of internalized ableism, it can be low self-esteem. Sometimes as well, it can stop people from reaching out for support. You know, sometimes they say, you know, my house is a mess because, you know, maybe like I need some assistance with that, you know, because of my disability. And I feel like a sense of shame reaching out to my friends or family, telling them. I know it can also make people feel a lot of anger, understandably so, like against the world, which I'm sure like anyone would feel as well, being in like a world that's not inclusive for you.
Yeah, I think a lot of feelings of shame, I think sadness, anger, you know, and I think as well that can stem from, especially, you know, as we said there, it's very individualistic. It doesn't come just from birth. If somebody's gone through something so life-changing, we can go through shock and denial as well. So like with the grieving process, it goes through those stages, and I imagine that's possibly something someone has to go through on a daily basis, just with that negative belief that is placed upon them. You know, and it's a shame really, because there is that preach of, you know, it's important to be different. You know, if we're all the same, it'd be boring. But if somebody is different, then it's wrong, which is shame. It's a shame, really.
Yeah, like they say it, but then in real life, for a lot of people, it's not always practiced that way.
Yeah.
So it can be really confusing, because it's like, oh, you know, you're telling me to speak out and I can see these things, but it doesn't feel like that. Maybe we're not quite there yet. You know, when it comes to this, I think there's a lot of talk about inclusion, but I think there's still some more work that needs to be done about it. But, you know, like you said before, I think that openness is so important when it comes to it, and having that empathy towards other people. I think when it comes as well with discrimination or anything like that, there can be a big sense of people not wanting to say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
I was listening to a podcast about this. He's a British Paralympian, and he was saying that he basically lost functioning of both of his legs. And he was saying that, you know, when he's out in public, sometimes like children, they'll be with their parents, and then, you know, the children will look at him more from curiosity, you know, wanting to like, oh, I wonder what happened, you know, to him, like not as much of like what's wrong with you, just what's happened.
Yeah.
And then sometimes the parents might have two very different reactions. So some parents might kind of grab their children and say, you know, no, don't talk to him, don't ask him that. And I think it can be very dehumanizing to say that, because it's making him feel like, God, I'm like a monster. You know, that they don't want, you know, the child to ask questions like that. But, you know, he was like, sometimes I just wish the parents would come over and say, you know, oh, do you mind if my child asks a question? They're just a bit curious. They want to understand this more. And I think that was a really interesting point he made about that, because I think it shows, first of all, how young they are when it comes to learning. So it's already kind of teaching the children, like, to have that innate curiosity about it, but also to say it in a respectful way. I'm not saying that, people are scared of saying the wrong thing about offending. I'm not saying that, people are scared about saying the wrong thing and offending people, but I also think it's important to ask things appropriately and mindfully when you're saying it, and with respect as well. Because I think that if you don't ask those questions, and if you don't have that open conversation, you're just avoiding it, and that there's a lot more detriment, and you're not actually acknowledging, the support that person needs.
Yeah. So I think it's deep rooted, isn't it? Because when you're a child, as you said, that parents have a very certain reaction, perhaps. That's not saying anybody's a bad parent at all, but it's more so, I think it comes from that place of maybe they don't want to offend, and take their child over and say, they're curious. Is it okay if they ask you a couple of questions? But I think by having that approach of saying, the child is curious, and is it okay if they ask you a couple of questions, being respectful and mindful, it teaches them that it is okay to ask these questions in a particular way, being respectful, being mindful, and not shying away from that conversation. And hopefully, if people were to have those conversations in childhood, it wouldn't be a deep-rooted issue that feels quite hard to be self-aware around, because that's something they would have learned growing up, saying, it is okay to ask these questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like that early conditioning, is it? And it's making them, it's like saying to your children that, it's, let's not run away, and, we don't have to avoid this and avoid this, because I think that's exactly the reason why a lot of people, not just employers, but, employers, friends, family, they kind of like tiptoe around it. But it's just, it's just about being honest and just being as open with you can as possible, and treating it with much compassion and empathy as you can. I think what also is important to do is thinking in terms of, the physical. So we've talked a little bit about the way that you can, like, emotionally support someone in your workplace, or anyone living with a disability as well. I think it's also important to talk about, like, more of the physical options that you can do as well. Is there any that in particular, or?
I know, like, having a disabled toilet, so it's more accessible for people. It can be, especially if you're working on computer screens, you can alter it to different colours. If you're dyslexic, for example.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think there's so many.
There is a lot.
There's so many different ones. I think things like, wide doorways, having ramps. I think even there's so many ways that you can think about it. Even just, making sure that there's quite wide enough desk spaces for people with wheelchairs, to make sure that they have those. Like you said, I think even having, like, sign language interpreters at work can also be, like, a really good benefit. What other ones? There's different type of, like, adjustable desks that you can have, so that, people can adjust it to their own liking. I think it's also important for reasonable working requests to be considered in workplaces as well. For a lot of disabled people, they might be in a lot of chronic pain. So, asking them, like, where do you work best? What's most comfortable for you? Maybe, like, having some sort of adjustments to allow them to work from home can also be really positive for them. Yeah,
I think those physical adjustments in terms of, maybe it's like with their physical environment, and so allowing that hybrid or remote working, or maybe it's looking at allowing somebody of extra breaks if they need it, or maybe if they really struggle with a change of environment, looking at trying to keep them in the same environment. If they like routine, trying to keep that there for them as well. Because some people may struggle with desk sharing. For example, if somebody comes in and changes the way the desk is, they may struggle with that and need some time to process that change. So I think it's looking at that physical environment, and again asking them, what can we do to support you? and allowing those changes to happen for it to be more accessible. So as you mentioned there, like wide doorways, you've mentioned the up and down desk, where it can move and be tailored.
Yeah. But I think, like we said, when it comes to any way that you can support someone, it's all about asking them what they need specifically, because it can be completely different for everyone. And I think as well, a point I wanted to make as well is, looking at what specifically leaders and managers can do. So when we think about it, 1 in 5 people in the UK have a disability. And to be honest, there's probably a lot of supervisors, a lot of leaders, a lot of bosses, even CEOs that probably living with a disability. And there's probably a reason why I feel like not a lot of them speak out about it, but because of the ableism, the points that we mentioned before. But I also think it's really important, if you are one of those, people in a higher position, I think it'd be really positive to be open with your staff about it. Obviously, if it's something that you're comfortable with. But I think it can be good to keep in mind that, this is something that's also going to really benefit your staff and probably build a better relationship with them.
Yeah, because I think when one person talks about it, it's, and that, I think that takes a lot of courage. Yeah. And I think when you take that first step in courage in terms of, especially somebody, who is a supervisor or somebody who is a leader, I think it empowers the wider team to be able to feel that they have the courage to share their struggles or, how things are impacting them, and, open up that conversation about, okay, this is what's going on for me as well. You've empowered me, you've gave me the confidence to be able to talk about this. And I think then it becomes quite an empowerful conversation in terms of saying, okay, so like maybe this is what I need in terms of support. Because I think there's sometimes where people may struggle with a disability but not sure what support they actually need. So I think maybe hearing it from another person who has a disability as well, it empowers them to maybe have a think about, okay, what support is it that I'm needing? Yeah, as well, maybe.
Yeah, I like that point you made there, because I think a lot of people don't always know what they need, because they've maybe never been asked that, so they've maybe never even thought that, because they might have thought to themselves like, no one's ever really asked me, so what do I actually need? So it might actually be the first time anyone's ever asked them that, especially in the workplace. And it's like we said, I think there's so many benefits of diversity and just having that diverse workforce with you right now. And I think people just need to be, I think a big one that we've shared about is just being open and just allowing people to say it. And I think as well, keeping in mind that some people might not always be comfortable to make those, so sometimes having anonymous feedback channels can be helpful, or one-to-ones regularly, and just saying, this is like a private space for you and me, and showing them that it's confidential, I think is important, so people know that their privacy is also respected.
Yeah, because I think it is a big step for somebody to share their struggles, and I think some people can be apprehensive as well, because maybe they only want to disclose it to one person but fearful that it will be shared to the wider team. So I think by having the anonymous feedback channels, by having the regular one-to-ones where it is a confidential space, where it is just you and your line manager, for example, I think it can make the environment a lot more comfortable to be able to share those struggles. But I think as well, it's trying to break that stigma, isn't it, around this, and trying to improve it in all directions for people, whether they want to share openly or anonymously. I think there are directions that we can put in place to help people do that.
Exactly, yeah. It's breaking down that stigma, and it's saying that, it's okay, you don't have to hide any of this, because, it's making people feel safe in the workplace that they're in. Because I think a lot of people that are disabled, they sort of fear sometimes speaking out about it, because they're worried that, their job might be in detriment, if they do talk about just the simple conditions that they need in order to do their best at work. And I think a big part of it is just, knowing that, this person has potential. This person can bring, a different, because they come from a different background, they've got a different set of eyes. I think it's always good to have different groups of people, because you don't just see things through the same lens. You can see things through different perspectives. So it's about seeing, the potential that person can bring, the different sets of skills, new perspectives that they can, and thinking, what can I do to help this person thrive and do the best that they can? And asking them, and even if could be like even just the smallest changes that they might need, or maybe it's even bigger changes that they need as well. But, I just wanted to say that as well, because I think some organisations, they can sort of make things, they can do it from a place that's maybe not from... They can do it from a place that's not within the best interest.
Yeah.
They might do it to meet a social quota, or to think that, sort of tick that box, I can do that. But, you have to really see the benefits that it can have, inclusivity as well. It's not just ticking a box, or it's not to make your brand look good as well. It's a lot deeper than that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it makes it really sad that it is just for some people ticking a box, just being looking inclusive to make the brand look good. Whereas I think with Health Assured, I think they show that they are very inclusive, and they are very open to supporting people. And it isn't just about ticking a box with Health Assured, I guess, as well. Just with the amount that they allow people to come into the service, with different formats is what I mean there. And also, I think the training, I think that's that really shows that somebody cares about the inclusivity.
Yeah, you're right. You're completely right there. And, you can have the training, you can have all that stuff, but you need to see a difference. You can stand there and say, we've done this and we've done that. But, if people don't see a difference and people don't feel it, then, what was the point in that, really?
Yeah.
You want to be able to help everyone.
So I think it's also important to note that it's not just the workplace that can be a struggle for people. We work with university and college students, and I think it's important that, their environments as learners is useful for them as well, and they are supported there.
Yeah, no, you're right, because we've said a big pretty much focus on workplaces, but as we know as well, universities as well, and students that do have a disability as well. It's also important that universities take all this into account as well, which I'm really glad you've mentioned, because I didn't even really think to go there. But obviously they need to have that support as well, so that they can have the needs that they need as well to excel in their studies and do as well. And I think it's just about being compassionate, listening to people, and thinking to themselves, like, what it is that you need right now. So I think it's great that even our live chat service, our video call, is also open to our student assistance program as well, that we have, not just our employee one. But yeah, it's just as important. And I think as well, if you are disabled and it is something that you are struggling with, I think even in university, starting support groups can be incredibly beneficial. Just being around other like-minded people, starting some sort of society to represent that, being an advocate, being open about it as you can. I think that passion can really go a long way. And as well, following loads of different role models.
Yeah.
I know that when I was, before doing this, I was listening to a few podcasts and listened to quite a few interesting different people and their own experience. And, even if you're disabled or non-disabled, I think listening to other people's stories can be really beneficial as well.
Yeah, I think it opens that education up and compassion, doesn't it? And I like what you mentioned there about the support groups for people as well, and having people who are advocates at university. I think it's nice when a lecture is open as well. I think, again, that takes a lot of courage, but I think, again, that can be applied, as we mentioned earlier on about the manager, leaders, that can be open. I think it comes from a nice perspective with the lecturer as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think as well, allowing the students to know where they can go in terms of needing that additional support. I think sometimes they may struggle, because I know with college and university you get a lot of information, but knowing that, okay, you can go to, for example, the wellbeing team at university, and they can tell, walk you through in terms of the support and how to access that at the university. I think by having that professional support is important as well, but also the peer support with the support groups.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like you said, then I think it's really important to make them aware of it, like literally everyone, because like we said, it's not always visible. So, even in inductions, saying like, FYI for anyone that might be affected by, anything at all, we've got all these different places that you can go to, making people aware about the support on the university, both professionally and peer-to-peer, is important. But yeah, no, thank you so much, Brittany, for sharing all your insight today. I hope that people have taken away, something from today and like are able to apply it and, best support the people around them from this.
Yeah, definitely.